Welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting, working on the Chapter 2 problems, Group B, and we're continuing on with the series for the problem 2-41B, and in the last video we had finished off by creating our trial balance, okay? And according to the instructions, let me erase this. Based on the instructions here, we prepared the trial balance in the last video. So now we're going to prepare the financial statements, the year-end financial statements, income statement, statement of retained earnings, and balance sheet. Most likely I'll do the income statement in one video and then try to squeeze the balance sheet, the retained earnings and the balance sheet in another video. Okay, so let's see where I go here. Get down, blank screen. Okay, so again, you follow a process. If you follow the process, you do the same thinking again and again and again. It takes that brain work out, and then all you have to do is just fill in the blanks. So when it comes to doing the income statement, we have the heading, and again I'm just abbreviating. The statement's name is income statement, and for the heading it says year ended December 31, 2014. Now, me personally, I would have written it as for the year ending December 31st, 2014. And either way is fine, all right? But just my default, I actually do it as for the year ending. And of course the income statement is for a period of time. So you have to write what the period is. In this case it's a year. If it was quarterly, you would write quarter. Monthly would be obviously monthly. And if it was every 4 weeks, all right, you would actually write for the 4 weeks. And remember, 4 weeks means you have 52 weeks in a year, and if you divide that by 4, you end up with actually 13 accounting periods in the year, right? But the income statement is created for periods of time. Okay, it's not like the balance sheet or the trial balance where the balance is in the account as of a specific date, right? And if you don't get that, go ahead and go back and watch the theory videos in order to see what I'm talking about in that respect. Okay, so the next thing I do, and again, this here is center aligned. Next thing I do is I write the category of accounts. So I'm going to write revenues and expenses. Actually, I'm going to write that up a little bit more because I only have one revenue account. And of course, we indent the accounts when we write the accounts in. So I have service revenue, and then I have for expenses salary expense. Let's see here, rent expense, utilities expense, insurance expense, and supplies expense. And I write total expense because I'm going to have a total of my expenses. And then I'm going to have my net, whatever it is, income or loss. I'm going to assume right now that we're going to have net income. Okay. And remember, we're getting this information from our trial balance right here. Okay. So here's my, here's my revenue account, and here's all of my expense accounts. Okay. So when we create the trial balance, we use the trial balance in order to create our financial statements. Now, I have to put in the amounts. Well, for service revenue, I only have one amount, which was $101,000. $700. And since I only have one revenue account, I don't need a total revenues. Okay, I can just put the one account. But because I have more than one expense account, and I want to know what my total expense is, what I do is I indent one column to the left, write all of the figures in that column, and then take that amount, whatever that adds up, and put it into the right-hand column, right? So as this works, salary expense, I'm indenting the column, and I write my $ because it's the first number in the column. So 750. Then I have 11,340 from my trial balance, 6,750 from my trial balance, 5,300 for the insurance expense, and 1,840 for the supplies expense. Now we're going to add these all up, so I draw a single underline, which represents, adding, mathematical calculation, and I put the total amount in the right-hand column, 73,980. Now what that does is, as you can see when you look down this column, you have a revenue, and you're going to subtract out your expense. Okay, so I draw an underline because that's going to be a mathematical calculation. All right, but notice how when I look down the column, I can easily see what my revenues were and what my expenses were. Okay, and of course the difference between those two gives me a net income of $27,720, and since that's the end of a calculation, I draw a double underline. All right, it's basically that simple. Notice the process. I create my heading, I write in my categories, I fill in the ledger accounts, I put in whatever additional descriptions I need, like total expense or net income, and then I put the numbers in the appropriate columns. Right now, it can't, this is called multi-step because I'm using more than one column. Theoretically, I could have put all of these numbers for my expenses in the right-hand column. Don't like doing that for the simple reason, if all of those numbers were in this column here, now it makes it more difficult to read the financial statement. So when you're dealing with your income statement and your balance sheet especially, always use multi-step, meaning more than one column. Your statement of retained earnings, since there's very little information on it and you're looking at it from a high-level view, your statement of retained earnings can be done in a single-step format. And since we are only at 8 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and try to do the the statement of retained earnings. Okay, so to do that, again, we need a heading, BC Inc., and then a statement of retained earnings. In other words, I'd write everything out, statement of retained earnings, but I'm abbreviating here. And the heading date should be the same as what is on your income statement, because the retained earnings is also for a period of time. Okay, so the heading is center aligned, and now I start filling in my descriptions. I have a tendency to write beginning, and I'm abbreviating the word beginning, retained earnings, and I'm abbreviating retained earnings, and then I put in the date, the very first date, January, the very first day of the accounting period. In this case here, since it's the year ended, our accounting period is for an entire year, and it's ending the 31st, the first day of the accounting period is January 1st. Okay, so whatever the accounting period is, the very first day of that accounting period, you need to put the date. Okay, it's not enough to say beginning retained earnings. You have to put in the date. Okay, and then I put in ending retained earnings, and then the last day of the accounting period. Now, if you look at the solution, you'll see I'm deviating a little bit in that I'm writing beginning and ending, whereas they're not doing it. Okay, that's fine, but notice that they have the dates. Okay, So they're kind of like looking and saying, okay, retained earnings as of that date, retained earnings as of that date. I like putting in the word beginning and the word ending in order to make it easier for the person to, as a tickler reminder that, they are looking at the first day of the accounting period, the beginning date, and the word ending for the ending date. Okay. Now, we're going to add something, okay, and then we're also going to have less something, okay. But before I go there, I am going to look to see how much the amount of my beginning retained earnings were. So when I come back up to my trial balance, I can see that that was $12,320, right? And remember, the instructions here said the retained earnings balance of $12,320 is the beginning balance for the year. It has not been updated for the current year's net income. Okay, so our beginning amount is $12,320, and then we're going to add in our net income. And our net income was $27,720. Okay, that's going to give us a subtotal. And notice that I am indenting right here. I'm indenting the word subtotal. Okay, so my subtotal means I'm doing a mathematical calculation and I'm getting $40,040. But I'm not double underlining it because it's this $40,040 is part of another mathematical calculation, and then I have to less my dividends. And so my dividend amount is $15,000. Okay, I get that again from the trial balance right there. Okay. Now notice I wrote that as a positive number. Okay. What's going to tell me that this is a subtraction, a deduction, in order to get my ending retained earnings of $25,040. Notice 40,000 less 15,000 gives me 25. The reason I'm writing 15,000 here as a positive number, okay, but the word less here tells me that I'm subtracting that 15,000 in order to get the 25,000. If I go and write the word less here, if I write the word less here, and then I come over here and in some way, shape, or form I denote that 15,000 as a negative number, what that actually tells me is that a minus, less meaning minus, times a minus number means I should be adding the 15,000 to the 40,000, and that should give me 55,000. But we know that's not right. So whenever you're doing this, we on our statement of retained earnings or on all of our financial statements, we try to use positive numbers wherever necessary, almost all of the time. But in order to know that this is, we're going to make a deduction, we have a tendency to use the word less in our description to let the person who's reading it know that that's going to be a subtraction, a negative, a deduction, in our math in order to take away from the amount. So that gives us the ending balance of, let me clean this up just a little bit. So that gives us an ending retained earnings for December 31, 2014. And that gets double underlined because that's the end of the calculation. All right. Now, notice that this $25,040 is our ending retained earnings. That ending retained earnings has to go on our balance sheet. Okay, in order to be able to do our balance sheet, we have to do the statement of retained earnings first to come up with that number to be able to use it on the balance sheet. But we can't create our retained earnings unless we know what our net income is. Okay, so you have to do the income statement first and come up with your net income, profit or loss, okay, so that you can adjust your, you can calculate your retained earnings in order to get that amount, so that you can use that on our next financial statement, which is our balance sheet. Now, while I was talking about that, a lot of times, and I'm just going to forewarn you, you're not seeing this in the book, the textbooks generally try to work with net income, all right, meaning that the company was profitable. But what happens, let's just say that you had a loss of, say, let's say you had a loss of $3,000 instead. Okay, so you don't have a net income, you have a net loss of $3,000. Well, here's what I mean about trying to use, trying to use positive numbers and negative numbers. You're still going to write the word add, but instead of net income, you would end up writing net loss. And in that case there, you would actually put in the negative number of $3,000. Why? Because adding is a plus times a negative number gives you a minus. That indicates that 12,000 minus 3,000, so you'd have $9,320 here for your subtotal. So yeah, you would have a negative number, here, right? But and that's one of those cases where you just can't get around it. You're not going to write less net loss. I mean, it is possible to write less net loss and then dividends in subtotal, and it gets all convoluted. Okay, so stick with the format that you have here. Okay, and if you ended up with a net loss, then yes, from on your income statement, then yes, you would write in the words net loss. Okay, and that would make, let me just write everything out here so that you'd see it a little bit better. That means we would actually write the negative $3,000 here, which would give me $9,320. Okay, and then I'd pay out dividends. Well, if we had that much, we would never be paying out $15,000 in dividends. We'd be paying $9,000 or less. Okay, so let's just, because that gives us a negative, we're in, it means we're upside down. We don't have enough money because we don't have any retained earnings. So we would actually only probably pay out $9,000 as dividends, and then our ending retained earnings would be $320. And the reason why I wrote all of this, because I want you to see an instance where you actually do use a negative number, even though we try to use positive numbers. And just be aware that the textbook has a tendency to always show everything as net income, meaning you had a profit. But realize that that's not the reality of business. The reality of business is that you're going to have losses, and you need to be able to, work with those losses just as easily as you work with, having a net income. Okay, so we had 27,720 here. We had 40,040 here, 15,000 here, and that gives me 25,040 here, which is going to end up on our balance sheet. Okay, so I hope you had gotten that. If you don't understand it, watch it again, go back and watch the theory videos, or telephone and speak with an instructor, and we'll go over it with you. Okay, all right, so I'll see you in the next video, which will cover doing the balance sheet.